How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Guys, I think this should be hopefully the last time we cover Bryan Kohlberger. I'm just answering some questions that came my way. And basically, the main question we're going to cover today is how Bryan Kohlberger could survive in prison. So just the opposite of what we've been covering, and definitely the opposite of what the news is covering. Basically, right now, they're talking about his life being threatened and all these other things. But there's another perspective I want to put in. And basically, how could he survive? Now, granted, we've done videos, I don't know, maybe a week ago that talked about, his life in prison and how he's going to be managed, and talked about the threats, talked about what happens when media puts the spotlight on stuff and how we have to react. But today, I'm going to approach this from a different angle to respect the questions that have been asked from the audience. So granted, there's 7 areas I want to cover. Some of this may be reiterated from the show we did prior, but there are other perspectives that I'm going to add in today's show. So it'll be good just to kind of tune in. I'll keep it real quick because I'm trying to move past this and try to find something else of interest. If you guys have any suggestions, message me, email me at gangianthony@yahoo.com. And again, I try to stay within my areas of expertise. I'm not a journalist, so I don't really even have the skill to track a case 100% all the way. Plus, I have my other job. But maybe there's certain areas of expertise that you find from watching the channel that I can help or my guests can help with. So in this case here, first thing I want to talk about is protective housing as a shield. So because of his notoriety, Kohberger will almost certainly, and we know this, be housed in protective custody or restrictive housing unit. These units keep them isolated from the general population where the biggest threats of violence exist. While isolating it, it also gives them built-in shield against opportunistic attacks. Staff are motivated to keep them safe because any incident would make national headlines. So we're aware of this, guys. He's already placed in a restrictive unit. It is a form of PC. So again, that's definitely needed because he's got attention on him right now. And to be honest with you, outside of what he's done obviously is horrible. The attention adds to the threat because it puts eyes on him. It puts eyes on the facility. There are going to be a lot of people that are in prison for crimes that are similar or worse, but they don't have the attention. And therefore, they may not be as vulnerable. So we always have to add that some of the threat is not just solely based on what he did, but also the attention the crime is receiving. And that's why for us, because if the media picks up on something and they run it with it, we don't know how people is going to interpret what they say. We don't know how it's going to be spun. And we don't know, when stuff is going to air, that's going to cause some concern. So we usually have the universal precaution of let's just lock them into PC and just try to keep them as safe as possible because right now it's too hot. It's just got too much attention. So the question that someone sent me here for this part, and we kind of covered this in the show prior, but just to provide something else, does protective housing truly protect, or does the isolation itself become its own form of punishment? And that's a great question because obviously the inmate may be alone a majority of the time, but we do balance it. Right. So we are going to have people visiting the unit. Mental health is going to have to go daily. Admin probably once a week. Custody is going to frequent as much as they can. So you are going to have interactions. Right. Now, believe it or not, a lot of people prefer their own cell. They prefer their own space. For someone like Kohberger, it gives them a higher level of control. And then obviously the controlled escorts, the limited interaction with other inmates, that helps him because if let's say he does come in and he has a fear for his safety or his well-being, and again, guys, regardless of what they've done, just bear with me. We do have to, monitor his safety, his care. This kind of puts him at a level at ease. Does he deserve it? I'm not saying he does, but I just want you to know this is what corrections does. We have to manage them. So we don't want him to be, mentally decompensating. So imagine if he was in general population and he was constantly getting these threats, so every day he wouldn't know what would happen to him. So that could also be a greater concern. So you have to try to find where the balance is. And to be honest with you here, the best thing to do is have him in a non-congregate setting where he could be safely monitored and handled without any or with limited chance of opportunity for him to get hurt or hurt himself. Now, granted, again, I know people may not want to hear this because of what he's done, but I have to speak from the professional side, and that is our job. So technically, it's not a form of punishment; it's a form of protection. So I don't like the word solitary confinement because that kind of connects to some level of punishment that we don't do. This is more about him being housed, isolated, or segregated, maybe the better word. Administrative segregation, I think, because that's when you're removed from the population and then whatever reason fits in. In this case here, protective custody. I think later on down the line, depending on how things go, there could be a chance to try to introduce him to other protective custody inmates, have more of a congregate setting, still within the control in a highly more controlled environment, but you're probably not going to see that for a while because it's too much attention on it right now. And I want to mention that is the outside of what he did, that is probably the main cause of why we have to take this highest level of management is because of that attention. Okay, so that's the first question. And guys, you'll see a lot more details on that from the other video. Second part I have is intellectual and educational advantage. Now, again, this is about could he survive? So I want to show some pros to say that maybe he could survive, kind of going the opposite of what's being discussed or what has been discussed from us. So intellectual and educational advantage. So at the PhD level background in criminology, he's better equipped than most inmates to survive long-term confinement. He can occupy his mind with reading, writing, and self-study. Tools that stave off boredom and mental breakdown in solitary. Again, I just say isolated. His knowledge of criminology and the justice system also gives him leverage in navigating grievances, appeals, and policy loopholes. The question I got here was, can intelligence be a survival advantage in prison, or does it sometimes make an inmate more of a target? So there's going to be another way that his intelligence can be used in a more useful manner, which I'll get to later on. I think that's number 6. But I want to stay focused on this because there's another area we're going to explore how he can be useful to the population. But with that said, again, the question is, can intelligence be a survival advantage? So nothing's 100%. Everybody has a breaking point. 100%. Everybody has a breaking point. But they tend to believe that people that are more highly intelligent find ways to occupy their mind when they are alone by themselves a majority of the day. And inmates that tend to not be as intelligent may not have all the ways to occupy their mind. But with that said, it really does depend on the individual and how they can deal with being alone, because we are social creatures. I don't think Kohlberger is a social creature. He seems to be, some people say maybe autistic, a little bit antisocial. So, but with that said, for the most part, we are wired to be social animals. But I think sometimes when you do have people that have an intellectual and educational advantage, sometimes they're able to handle that level of confinement or that level of limited interaction a lot better because they know how to occupy their mind. They either keep studying or they just keep themselves busy, keep the mind moving. And so it does not affect them as much. But again, nothing's 100% because I've seen smart people too break down. So really, it also depends on the individual. But in this case here, this isn't solitary. This is just someone that has to be put separated from everybody for their own safety. But again, they are going to have interactions. You know, inmates like that do get seen, as I said before, daily by staff, mental health professionals, medical professionals. So they are going to have brief interactions. All right, let me get to the next point. We have high profile status cuts 2 ways. So on the other video, may have touched more of one side, but okay. So on one hand, his name recognition makes him a prime target for notoriety-driven violence. Let me read that again. On one hand, his name recognition makes him a prime target for notoriety-driven violence if he ever reaches general population. Okay, sorry, it's notoriety-driven violence if he ever reaches population. What I mean by that is, so I try to read my notes here. What I mean by that is that people do connect to fame. They do connect to the attention. So having said that, if he has attention, how can I get it? Maybe I can get attention from taking him out. And we discussed that in the other video. That's what I'm saying. Media could be a big part of that threat because he's connected to that spotlight, to that attention. And people will try to find a way to get that attention. And most of the time, could be some level of jailhouse justice. You know, he's seen as a monster. I'm going to kill the monster, be the hero. Or he's seen as the monster. Now I want to take the monster out. So again, you got to be worried about that. That's why you got to be very worried about how that media spreads the story, because you could have something quiet, and all of a sudden there's a 10-year anniversary. You never know, and media can be very unpredictable. At one point they have an interest, and then they don't. Eventually this will die out, but then just when you think it's quiet, someone speaks up again, and they bring it back, or the 10-year anniversary, they bring it back. So because there's so much spontaneity here, you got to be very careful, because even, as I say, even if it's fresh, there's just, you never know when something's going to pop out, to kind of keep that thing going, to make it fresh. And then even if it's, as I meant to say, even if it's played out for a long time, someone could make it fresh by putting an anniversary on it or something. So for something like that, because it is high profile, it's probably something that's going to be high profile for probably his duration. So it may be safe just to keep him in an area that's more isolated. But that doesn't mean he'll never be able to interact with other inmates. It just means he'll be in a highly more isolated area. We just got to see how that rolls out, because eventually you want to go from non-congregate to some congregate level of PC. On the other hand, being too hot often deters attacks. Inmates know bringing heat on themselves could mean harsher consequences. For staff, his case will always bring extra oversight, making them far more cautious with his care, because again, it's the site, it's the facilities in the spotlight now, right? So every little thing matters. And when you got people, what does he brush his teeth with? How's he occupy his day? Small things, daily routine things, but people got interest because it's him. Question I have here is, do you think being famous in prison is a shield, a curse, or both? I think it depends on what you're famous for. People like P. Diddy probably could be seen as someone that would see it as a shield, because they can lean on it. Some people actually still see them as success stories. So I really do think it's subjective on how you view what the person's famous for. I think that matters. I think for Kohlberger, it could be a curse, but there's also other things in the news that separates the man from the crime. Some people will look at the crime and say he's an animal and I want him taken out. Or some people may say, hey, he's got a criminal justice degree. I can utilize that. I need help with my case. And we'll get to that in 6. So I think it's really how you view the man and the crime. Some people will view the crime and that becomes, what they target, or some people will view the man and that could be used as a shield. So again, just shield, curse, it really is subjective on how it's viewed by the individual and what their motives are for whatever it is they're looking to accomplish. There's always motives. So, you got to look to see what are you trying to get from that. So that matters too. So you really can't just do a universal blanket, because there's motives, there's intent. So psychological edge. So reports suggest Kohlberger has rigid routines and possibly narcissistic or psychopathic traits. Ironically, those traits may help him tolerate isolation better than others. He may not crave the same social connections. We talked about that. And his obsessive structured diet, fitness, reading could give him anchors in the monotony of prison life. So can personality traits that are destructive in society actually become survival trait tools in prison? Yeah, I 100% agree. It's a different world. But with that said, his routine is caught in the structure. So, maybe where there is less interaction, then there's also more control, if that makes sense. Like, there's not a lot of inmates here, so therefore pretty much I can determine what I need to do. So I think that actually does work in his favor a little bit more, with some level of control. And it says, can personality traits that are destructive in society actually become survival tools in prison? Yeah, if he's antisocial, he's not going to work well with others, then putting him by himself may not be that big of a deal. So again, it really does depend on the individual, and everybody has their own breaking points, and the breaking points could be for different reasons. But with that said, I think in his case, he's going to be okay with the single cell. He's going to be okay with the limited interaction, and I think that it's going to give him a defined structure that he could assume he has more control of, because there's less interference, there's less counter influence. So I don't think it's going to be as what some people are turned into. And guys, if people are running with just he's being taunted, he's being hazed and teased, or all this other stuff, harassed. He can't sleep at night. Okay, I mean it could be any inmate, to be honest with you, not just him. It could be any inmate. So institutional familiarity. So unlike most inmates, he studied offenders, staff dynamics, and correctional systems academically. This awareness may give him an edge in predicting inmate behavior, reading staff routines, and recognizing when someone is testing him. Doesn't make him invincible, but it could help him avoid pitfalls that catch less informed inmates off guard. So does knowing how the system works help someone survive in prison, or can it backfire if staff think you're too calculating? All right, so you always got to figure that inmates, they understand the system, and if they don't understand it at first, they understand it, once they have to live there for so many years. So he came from the jail, got some understanding. Now he's working in the prison. And then he has the academic teachings, which is a lot different than reality, but still a nice, strong foundation. Most inmates are not going to have that. So he's going to understand how to utilize the systems like the grievance systems we mentioned above, the appeal system, stuff like that. So it's good for him to understand how the system works. I don't think staff is going to really care if he challenges the system, because we expect all inmates to do that. It really is. I mean, it just means staff will have to be on the point when dealing with them. You assume a guy like this is going to quote a lot of policies and procedures, because he's going to try to memorize a lot of stuff to try to stick to routines, and staff has to kind of know their stuff and know how to explain, decisions that they may make that he may challenge that has to be answered. They don't have to answer every why to every decision they make, but there could be some where it's irrelevant. I mean, it's relevant, and staff may say, okay, you know what? We are making a change. This is why, blah, blah, blah. But not everything deserves an explanation in corrections, because once you go to explain something, the inmates look at the why, how you justify it, and that's where they find the weakness. So sometimes staff won't tell them why. It's just a directive. You can't question it. Do it. But if the why makes sense, and at this point, maybe it's easier to explain so people can have an understanding, I'll give it a shot. But if you're choosing to kind of push it or manipulate it or whatever it is, I already told you once. That's it. It's not changing. This wasn't a debate. I told you the why, because this is the answer, not for a discussion. No correctional objective that needs to be accomplished is up for negotiation. But I do think it could benefit him knowing how the system works, because he's also coming in with a set of expectations. So once you know how the system works, you also know what to expect. The manipulative side of that is once you know how the system works, you know how to predict. You know how to circumvent to some extent. But that's what staff's there. Staff should be able to expect that, and then make sure he doesn't have a chance to circumvent or get or staff should know that they shouldn't get so caught up in routines or bad habits that they also become too predictable. So again, I like the idea that he kind of understands how the system works, but not to manipulate, but rather this is the expectation. I think he'll fit in line with that expectation. I do. I think that he'll accept the structure, and it'll just become a needed expectation. If you ever shift slightly from the structure, will be the moment you may have a concern, and then you just kind of bring him back into where he needs to be. And you may need the help for mental health with that, in my opinion. All right, so this one here is making himself useful as a jailhouse paralegal. I wanted to add this. So this is where I think his strongest benefit is, and I think this is where he'll be protected the most. This is an asset. Inmate paralegal is an asset. And with his knowledge and everything, this could be a reason to protect him. He may be, sorry, some noise in the background. He may be isolated from some level of physical interaction, but I don't know how they're going to work with maybe inmates that, know he knows these things, that may want to write to him to see if they can help him with cases. I mean, if I was him, I would make myself useful and try to see if I can get into the paralegal system for the inmate paralegal system, maybe work with education, however that's provided, and try to start providing some help and becoming useful in that manner. And that's a great key for survival, because if you're working on someone's case and you're doing good, they're going to protect you, regardless of what you've done. And again, remember, guys, when you're in prison, people use people. They don't care what they've done. They use people. They're an object to me. So if that person's serving me a function and I need that function done, I'm going to protect not the person, the function. I'm going to protect what the function is giving me. So he could be seen just as a function. So one major survival strategy would be becoming useful in prison. Usefulness is currency. With his education, Kohlberger could help inmates with appeals, grievances, or sentence modifications, in-house charges. That role, and by the way, in-house charges usually don't allow for outside influence unless it gets to an appeal process at the highest level of the appellate division. So there's a lot of charges in-house that have to be heard within in-house. It's not allowed outside influence. So that's where you have a strong paralegal who, may be able to manage that. And again, staff's got to be on point with that. If you have an inmate like that, that's a paralegal, and let's say he's good, you got to get your evidence in play. You got to get the witness. You got to, inmates have rights back there too. So again, if he's useful and he serves a function, you protect the function. So that role could earn him informal protection from others who benefit from his skill. Even staff may tolerate it more if he channels energy into law library work instead of constant conflict. Guys, there's also another thing here too. A good paralegal can also be very beneficial to the facility. So staff can also work well with a good paralegal or a good tier representative. So if he winds up being a paralegal, because it could happen, because again, there's limited access there, and he could put in for that job. If he's there, he may already have the criteria to be able to get that job. That could be a good resource for staff. Again, just letting you know, I'm not saying, again, I'm not looking at what he did, just looking at a function that he could serve. The risk is he could be, there's another thing here too. So there is a risk. He could be pressured to work for certain groups targeted for helping one inmate over another, or seen by staff as manipulative, but overall legal help could be the strongest path to survival. And guys, by the way, sometimes inmates that are highly targeted or highly vulnerable, especially those that are have crimes that are considered crimes of just distaste. I mean, because even in prison, there is a bit of understanding of what you do and don't do. They could get taken advantage of because of that vulnerability. So sometimes, like, I'll give you an example. If I have a sex offender who could be definitely targeted because of their offense, start doing jobs that requires him to have a lot of movement and a lot of access to other areas, he could be a runner for other inmates. An inmate like that doesn't really want to be seen by everyone, but all of a sudden he wants a job where he's delivering things all over the compound. So how do I know he's not being targeted or being pushed to do these things? So you got to, and guys, even in sex offender prisons, there's a tier, believe it or not. So I worked in prisons where you have just strictly sex offenders, the what we would say the lowest of low crimes, and they kind of separate. Well, at least I'm not going after children. I go after adults. And so it's like a hierarchy that is of the weirdest. Again, these are things that if you work in the system. That's why they've got to start bringing people on platforms that know the system. So if you guys know news reporters and you're connected to them, Court TV, I would love that. Law and Crime, News Nation. I mean, I've been on News Nation before, but maybe I would like to try Court TV or Law and Crime to give that perspective. Or Russ, who's on my channel, put it out there. Maybe a nice dialogue with Bryan from News Nation. Let's get people that are in the profession talk that side. Let's not always go to former inmates, guys. Go to people that work the profession, because there's a lot more about managing a prison that inmates do not know. So I think it would be fair just to have both. So it will always be good to have that higher level dialogue, and it will give some exposure to this perspective. And then the question here was, in prison culture, is it safer to be feared, respected, or useful? Respected is always obviously going to be the best way to go. Useful is more about obligation until you're no longer useful. And feared, you can live by fear until the moment your back is turned and someone's going to take you out. There's always someone in prison that's not going to fear you. So usually respect carries a lot. And I've seen people come in with automatic respect and they make it. Someone that's been in the prison for a while sometimes gets heavy respect unless they mess it up. So there are certain things that get you respect automatically. You just don't want to mess it up. But the useful thing until you're no longer useful, that's a problem. And feared, turn your back, and the person you backed in the corner is going to catch you when you're vulnerable and eventually go all out. I wanted to give just a kind of revisit something from the disadvantage, even though we touched in the other episode. I just want to reiterate a couple of points, but I would really watch the other episodes we've done for more of a discussion on this. But I had the disadvantages real quick as isolation strain, years in segregation could cause paranoia, anxiety, and mental decline. I don't think that's the case so much for this because it's balanced, but I'm going to put it in there because that's what people think. But I think there's a lot of balance when it comes to managing inmates in these type of settings. That's not really put out in the media a lot. So I want you to know that it is balanced, and if there's a chance where he starts to decompensate, which maybe could happen, but he is a smarter inmate. He's got a lot of things going for him that may say that he won't. I think he would prefer to be alone. He's kind of antisocial anyway. But if it does happen, there's things to put in play to manage that before it gets too severe. I just don't think that's the case with him. Public enemy stigma. This is just more related to the media. We mentioned if he's ever transitions in the population, his notoriety makes him an instant target. So again, I think that's the main thing that makes him a target is the notoriety. So the media, hey, is his crime going to make him a target? No, it's you promoting his crime that's going to make him a target. It is what it is, or adds to it. Ego versus staff. Don't get me wrong. People need to know. I'm not saying that, but sometimes you got to be careful what you put out there because, again, we have to manage them behind the wall. And I don't think people think that. He's out of society, but we still have to manage him and we have to manage his safety and well-being. And sometimes the impulsive media, running onto the next story or maybe running on facts or what they think are facts, could add a lot of stress to our system. And then ego versus staff. His arrogance and intellect could clash with officers who control every detail of his life. And we'll see what happens with that. I'm curious to see if that's the case. I'm curious to see when he challenges his first subtle change and, how staff's going to back it, how he takes it. Because I know when he was mentoring and stuff with these college students, when he was like an adjunct or whatever he was a mentor, whatever it was, how he treated people. That's not going to happen with staff. Staff is in the higher level position. They are not subordinate to you. They are not inferior to you. So if you decide that if Kohlberger decides he's going to go in there and think his intellect is going to make him superior and that he can outsmart staff, I think he's going to be wrong with that 100%. Because you may have all the knowledge, but staff has the experience, and they are not. One, they're not in a position to be inferior to you, but two, they're not going to allow that. Inferior means I'm giving you my authority, and we are told or trained to protect that authority. So the moment you try to push superiority or whatever it is, staff's going to humble him real quick. Professionally, but they're going to humble him. Last question that was sent my way was, which breaks an inmate down faster, physical danger from other inmates or the mental strain of long-term isolation? What they forget to mention here is that sometimes, as I said, inmates are isolated because there's the constant threat of them going to GP and possibly getting hurt. So the inmate is thinking about that mentally. Shoot, I got to go to this movement. I got to go to this. I can get assaulted. So I think the safety of long-term isolation, I like to word it that way. Whoever wrote that question, it's the safety of long-term isolation is a lot better than having to manage the unknowns. And I just want to mention this. In school, bullying was a big thing, right? The big thing about bullying was not so much about the physical danger, but the harassment and how it distracts kids from learning. Like, I can't learn about what I have to learn if I'm afraid I'm going to get beat up the moment I go in the hallway or at 3:00. So that takes on a lot of mental stress. But if you're able to alleviate that and say, hey, listen, we took care of you. You can go here and there, or we got rid of these bullies here, so you're safe. That eases the child up, and the child's able to learn. I think here that's the case. You try your best to control the environment by trying to eliminate most of the interactions so he can be safe. And now he doesn't have the pressure, being overwhelmed of being threatened and being assaulted at any moment. So that could become less stressful. And then next thing you know, you realize that the isolated, having him housed in isolation actually was better for him mentally. Again, you can't always assume that everybody wants to have contact with other people. That's kind of on the generalized basis here. Some people do. Some people, they want to be protected, but they want to interact. And some people just want to be protected. So I think what they forget to put in the news and all this other stuff is the context. A person that's antisocial, that could be afraid of being assaulted. I think the biggest worry is putting him in GP and having his mind play so many games that he could be attacked any moment, that would play with him. As opposed to say, you know what, let's safely guard him here, keep him limited with interactions, and let's get this guy going on a routine that he can trust to some extent. And then that could eliminate some of the mental toll that the unknown could have, because this is a guy that wants control. So as always, guys, the show is here. Hopefully you enjoy the content and stay safe.